There were once 3 brothers who lived in a village. The 2 elder ones were clever, but the third was Emelya the fool. One day the elder brothers set off for a fair in a distant town and said to Emelya, "Don't you go lazing around all day on the stove, Emelya. Do as our wives tell you, and we'll bring you back some presents. A pair of new boots, a coat, and a fine red cap." "All right," Emelya replied. "I'll do as they tell me." The brothers said goodbye and rode off. After a while, their wives said, "We have no water. Emelya, go and fetch some from the river." But Emelya called back from the stove-top, "I don't feel like it." "You don't? Who promised to help us?" "All right then." Emelya climbed down from the stove-top, put on his ragged coat and bast shoes, stuck an axe in his belt, hung the buckets on a yoke over his shoulders, and set off. He went down the hill to the river and chipped away at the ice that had formed over the water-hole. Suddenly, a huge pike swam up. Quick as a flash, Emelya grabbed its tail and pulled it out of the water. "Why have you caught me, fool?" the pike asked him in a human voice. "To take you home to my sisters-in-law, of course. They'll make some nice fish soup for me to eat." The pike began to beg Emelya, "Don't kill me, dear lad. Throw me back in the river and I'll make you a rich man." "No," said Emelya. "I can get along quite nicely without your riches. Thank you." "Then I promise you that all you need to say is, 'By the will of the pike, let it be as I like,' and your wishes will come true." "Now you are talking," said Emelya. He threw the pike back into the water-hole and chanted, "By the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Fill up buckets and take yourselves home." No sooner said than done. The buckets filled themselves and set off up the hill, waddling like ducks, while Emelya followed them laughing. When the neighbors saw the buckets, they couldn't believe their eyes. People came running out of their houses to see the strange sight. "Look at that!" they cried. "What tricks Emelya's got up to now? His buckets are walking along on their own, without stumbling or spilling a drop of water." The sisters-in-law saw Emelya and began whispering, "He's no fool. He's made the buckets walk home on their own. The smart lad." The buckets reached the house, climbed up the steps to the porch without spilling a drop of water, and set themselves down on the bench. Emelya took off his ragged coat and bast shoes, climbed onto the stove-top, and called, "Hey, sisters-in-law, the stove's gone cold." "It's cold because there's no fire in it. Go to the forest and cut some firewood, then we'll light it for you." "I don't feel like it." "So you don't feel like it again? Then you won't get any presents and you'll have to lie on a cold stove." There was nothing for it. Emelya climbed down from the stove-top, put on his coat, and went into the yard. He pulled out the sledge, threw an axe, a saw, and a long piece of rope into it, and then got in himself. "Hey, sisters-in-law," he shouted, "open the gates. I'm riding to the forest." "Are you crazy?" they said. "How can you ride to the forest without a horse? We'll help you harness it to the sledge." But Emelya replied, "Why tire the horse out? Poor thing, I'll manage without it. Open the gates." They marveled at this, but did as he said, and Emelya whispered, By the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Ride into the horse on your own sledge. The sledge shot off as if it had been whipped with 3 knouts, with no snow crunching under the runners. On it sped through villages and hamlets, its shafts waving about because Emelya had forgotten to tie them. It was festival time in the village, and lots of folks were out celebrating. They ran behind the sledge and alongside it. Some even tried looking underneath it to see how it could run without a horse. But the shaft swept them all aside, knocking many down or tossing them into the snow. They got angry and chased after Emelya to catch him and bring him back, but he was too quick for them. The sledge reached the forest and stopped. Emelya got out, looked around, and chanted, "By the will of the pike, let it be as I like." Saw down the trees, saw, and mind you choose dry ones. You chop them up for firewood, axe, and wood. You lie under the axe, and then tie yourself onto the sledge. No sooner said than done. The saw got busy on the trees. The axe chopped them up for firewood, and the firewood piled itself onto the sledge, then tied itself up firmly, and they were ready to go. Emelya fastened the shafts so they wouldn't hit anyone, then sat down on the firewood and shouted, "By the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Ride home, sledge." The sledge sped off, sending up a cloud of snow behind it. The villagers were waiting for Emelya with prongs, sticks, cudgels, and ropes. They wanted to teach him a lesson. What right had he to give them such a fright and knock them over as he rode to the forest? When he came in sight, they waved their ropes and prongs and shouted, "Catch him! Grab him! Stop him!" But how could you catch or grab him when he was speeding along like the wind, with the sprays of snow covering up his tracks? The sledge raced up to the gates and stopped. The faggots hopped off the sledge and skipped away. Some stacked themselves neatly in the yard, while others skipped single file through the porch into the house. And straight into the stove. Then the axe and saw went inside, lay down under the bench, and made themselves comfortable. The sisters-in-law were so frightened they didn't know what to think or do. They rushed around in a tizzy. One hid under the table, the other on the sleeping bench. "Will, tell your brothers what you've been up to," they cried. But Emelya only laughed at them. "Cowardly custards! Come out and give me a nice bowl of hot cabbage soup. I got chilled to the marrow in the forest." While Emelya was eating the soup and resting on the stove top, the villagers went and complained to the Tsar. "There's a fool called Emelya who rides around on a sledge without a horse, scaring everyone, knocking them down and tossing them into the snow." The Tsar was curious to see what this fool was like, so he sent one of his noblemen to summon Emelya to the palace. The nobleman came to the village not alone, but with a retinue of servants. He found Emelya's house, went in, and shouted menacingly, "Where is Emelya the fool? Bring him to me at once." The sisters-in-law hid behind the stove, too frightened to show themselves or utter a single word. Only Emelya was not afraid. "Here I am," he said. "On the stove I lie and you spy. What do you want? Put on your coat, fool, and your shoes, fool. I am taking you to the Tsar himself, fool." "I don't feel like it." "Oh, you don't? We'll see about that." The nobleman went up to Emelya and slapped him on the face. Bring him down by force, he cried. Emelya didn't like this one little bit, so he whispered, By the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Come on, Cudgel, give our uninvited guest a little treat, and you teach him a lesson. Broom. Up jumped the cudgel and the broom and gave the Tsar's nobleman a real thrashing. He stopped shouting at Emelya and began to squeal, hop about and beg for mercy. Then the nobleman rushed out of the house for dear life with all his servants. But the cudgel and the broom went on beating them daylights out of him all the way to the palace. The nobleman crawled up to the Tsar on all fours and said, There's no taking him by force. Trickery is needed here. So the Tsar sent another nobleman for Emelya, with less rank and more brain. This messenger stocked up with honey cakes, nuts and lollipops, and set off on his errand. Reaching the village, he found Emelya's sisters-in-law and asked him, What does this Emelya of yours like and dislike? He doesn't like people being rude to him. He likes to be spoken to nicely. The Tsar's messenger went into the house, walked up to the stove, bowed low and said, Good day, Emelyan Ivanich. Kindly try these honey cakes, nuts and lollipops, and come with me to the Tsar. The Tsar wishes to take a look at you. But I don't feel like getting down from the stove, said Emelya. Please, come, Emelyan Ivanich. If you don't, the Tsar will be sure to chop off my head. Emelya took a pity on the Tsar's messenger. Oh, all right then, he said. I'll come. Only you go on ahead and clear the way. I'll follow you. The Tsar's messenger asked the sisters-in-law quietly, The fool won't deceive me, will he? No, they replied. He's not like that. He always keeps his word. So the Tsar's messenger rode off. Emelya stretched comfortably on the stove and said, I don't want to get down from this nice warm stove. There's a snowstorm outside and it's better cold. My old coat's nothing but holes and patches. Now then, stove, by the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Giddy up to the Tsar's palace. The stove wriggled and grunted, then tore itself out of the house and charged off. Filled a meadow through village and hamlet until it caught up the Tsar's messenger and overtook him. On and on it charged, straight as an arrow, puffing out smoke, while Emelya sat behind the chimney singing happily. Right into the capital went the stove and up to the Tsar's palace. The whole capital was in an uproar, with people pointing and shouting, dogs barking, horses neighing, and cocks crowing. The Tsar's servants hurried up to him. Come, quickly, sir. Emelya, the fool, has ridden to see you on a stove. The Tsar went out on the porch with his daughter, lords and noblemen. He asked Emelya sternly, What right have you to ride on a sledge without a horse? What right have you to frighten my subjects and knock them down? But Emelya replied boldly, That was their fault, not mine. They wouldn't get out of the way. If you had stood there, you would have been knocked over too. The Tsar got angry and ordered them to pull Emelya off the stove, whip him and lock him up. Seeing that things did not bode well, Emelya whispered quietly, By the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Giddy up home, stove, and you fall in love with me, Tsar's daughter, and demand to marry me. So the stove turned around and charged back home. Get hold of him! Pull him off the stove! Tie him up! The Tsar cried, but in vain. Emelya left as he had come, without so much as a hail or farewell. The stove got home, grunted, they settled down peacefully in the corner again. The stove got home, grunted, and settled down peacefully in the corner again, as if nothing had happened. But in the Tsar's palace there was weeping and wailing. The Tsar's daughter gave her father no peace. "Why did you threaten Emelya? Why did you frighten him? I can't live without him. I want to marry him." The Tsar thundered and banged his fist and stomped his feet, but to no avail. Day and night his daughter wept, without food and drink, nor sleeping a wink, just wasting away. There was nothing for it. The Tsar ordered them to fetch Emelya. "Only not on the stove," he said. "There's no getting him off that. Bring him on a sledge, then we can deal with him." The Tsar's crafty messenger galloped to the village, tricked Emelya with his cunning words, gave him a sleeping potion, tied him up, threw him on the sledge, and galloped back like the wind. He brought Emelya to the Tsar, who had prepared a big barrel. The servant seized Emelya and put him in the barrel. When he saw this, the Tsar's daughter ran up, put her arms around the barrel, and clung to it for dear life. "Where Emelya goes, I go too," she cried. In his anger, the Tsar lost his senses and ordered them to put his daughter in the barrel too. "If she loves the fool so much, let her perish with him." And so they did as the Tsar commanded. They bound the barrel with hoops of iron, then tore it and threw it into the sea. Off it bobbed on the waves. The Tsar's daughter untied Emelya and tried to wake him. "Don't sleep, Emelya, wake up! We are inside a barrel floating on the sea. Without food and drink, we'll starve to death." "I want to sleep," Emelya said. "So do I, but now's the wrong time. Roll the barrel onto the shore. You're so clever, you can do anything." "All right, if that's what you want," said Emelya. "By the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Roll onto green meadows and golden sands, barrel, and break open." No sooner said than done. The barrel rolled onto an island, burst open, and out there walked on green meadows and golden sands. The Tsar's daughter looked round her and said, "How can we live here, Emelya? Look, there are no villages or towns. If only we had at least a little wooden hut." "We'll have more than that," Emelya replied. "Now, then, by the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Build yourself palace, fairer than even the Tsar's." And there before them a beautiful palace seemed to rise out of the ground. It stood on 7 pillars and was wondrously fair, with silver roofs, golden domes, and pretty porches on all sides. And all around it were gardens with singing nightingales and ponds with geese and swans. They entered the palace, and the inside was even more wondrous. A bright sun moved o'er the ceiling, and when it set, a silver moon and countless stars appeared. They entered the palace, and the inside was even more wondrous. A bright sun moved o'er the ceiling, and when it set, a silver moon and countless stars appeared. And so they lived in the palace on the island and wanted for nothing. But it was lonely without a living soul. "If only I could see some relatives," the Tsar's daughter sighed. "All right," said Emelya. "By the will of the pike, let it be as I like. Span the sea iron bridge, and let my brothers and their wives come across you to visit us." No sooner said than done. A bridge suddenly sprang up across the sea, with gold railings and posts studded with glittering precious stones. And over the bridge came a cart with Emelya's brothers and their wives, as smart as could be in new shirts and sarafans. And they hugged Emelya and kissed him. "We've been hunting high and low for you, fool," they said, in forest and fen, so this is where you are. Suddenly they heard cannons firing. A ship moved by the island, and on the ship was the Tsar with all his court. "Where are you bound for, mariners?" asked Emelya. "We've been sailing the sea for many days looking for a barrel." "Why do you need the barrel?" "I'll tell you why," said the Tsar, "because my daughter's inside it with Emelya the fool. I lost my senses and wanted to get rid of them." "Take a good look at me," said Emelya. "Aren't I the one who came riding to see you on a stove?" The Tsar looked at him and almost died of fright. He went down on his knees to Emelya. "Forgive me, Emelya, don't punish me." "All right," said Emelya. "So be it. I'll forgive you this time." Then the Tsar's daughter appeared. "Come into the palace, one and all," she said. So they sat down at their oaken tables spread with fine cloths and began to eat, drink and make merry to their hearts' content. Oh, I was there, drank mead ale, and yet scarce did get my whiskers